Silence fell over the throne. The king, whom no one dared to defy, was challenged by a servant, a simple woman, an unexpected gesture. The entire kingdom held its breath. Intrigues, secrets, and alliances on the brink of breaking. Who truly holds the power? And what will the courage of a single voice cost? In the end, nothing will be the same. The impossible is about to happen.
The sky above Arvindor was heavy, choked by smoke from the iron forges that fed the war machine of the crown. Beneath it, the great courtyard of the royal fortress overflowed with people. Peasants, merchants, soldiers, nobles, forced to attend yet another public execution. Silence weighed over them like a command carved in stone. No one spoke. No one even dared to breathe too loudly. At the center stood a single man on his knees, a royal soldier with a torn uniform, blood staining his collar. Two guards held him down while a third stood ready with a sword. A banner was raised. The royal crest. Judgment had begun. From the marble balcony above, King Aldrich Valaris appeared. Tall, armored in black steel, his presence alone radiated cold authority. His gaze swept over the crowd, sharp, unreadable, merciless. "Sergeant Ryland Thorne," Aldrich declared, his voice cutting through the courtyard like a blade. "You are accused of treason against the crown. You leaked military supply routes to insurgents, resulting in the death of loyal soldiers. How do you plead?" Ryland lifted his head, eyes fierce despite the bruise on his jaw. "I plead innocent, my king. I've served you for 12 years. I'd die for this kingdom." "Then die for it," the king replied without hesitation. The crowd flinched, but no one protested. No one dared. The executioner raised his sword. The condemned man closed his eyes and whispered a prayer under his breath. The silence deepened, dense with fear. Only one thought echoed through the minds of the people. No one challenges the king. No one. The blade gleamed under the pale sun as it began to fall. And somewhere among the crowd, someone clenched their fists. Someone's heart beat not with fear, but with burning defiance. Because today, the king would be challenged, and the world would never forget it. The executioner's sword froze midair, not because he hesitated, but because a voice cut through the silence before steel could cut flesh. "Stop!" Gasps rippled through the courtyard. Heads snapped toward the sound. A figure pushed through the crowd, small, cloaked in simple linen, hands trembling but eyes burning. A servant. She stumbled past the front line of guards, breathless but unyielding. Her brown hair was tied back messily, her dress stained with the dust of the laborers' quarters. She didn't belong anywhere near the royal platform, yet she walked straight toward it. The executioner hesitated, confused. The guards moved in. The crowd panicked. "Seize her!" someone shouted. Before they could reach her, she raised her voice again, steady, clear, dangerous. "This judgment is a lie!" A shock ran through the people like lightning. You could feel fear racing through their bones, because no one said that. Not here. Not under his rule. High above, King Aldrich leaned forward slowly, eyes narrowing as he studied her. "Who dares speak without permission in my court?" His tone was lethal calm. The woman didn't bow, didn't tremble, didn't avert her gaze. "My name is Lyria," she said. "And this man is not a traitor. He's being framed." The courtyard erupted in chaos. Whispers. Outrage. Fear. "Silence," thundered Aldrich, and the world obeyed. Guards surrounded Lyria, gripping her arms, but she didn't stop. "Sergeant Ryland was nowhere near the supply vaults the night they were robbed," she said, fighting to breathe as the guards pulled her back. "He was in the lower town, delivering medicine to the sick. I saw him. I spoke to him." Ryland stared at her in disbelief. Aldrich rose from his throne. "And why," he asked coldly, "would a servant of my castle defend a soldier accused of betraying the kingdom?" The air itself seemed to hold its breath as Lyria met the king's gaze. "Because someone in your court," she said, voice ringing like iron on stone, "wants him dead, and wants you blind." 1,000 hearts stopped beating at once. For the first time in years, King Aldrich did not speak. He'd been silenced. By a servant. Arvindor was a kingdom split in two, not by borders but by truth. From a distance, it looked like a paradise carved from marble and gold. High towers climbed the sky like spears. Bridges of white stone arched over crystalline rivers. Music from noble banquets drifted over the capital at night, mixed with the echo of laughter, wealth, and wine. But beauty ended at the palace walls. Beyond the glittering heart of the kingdom, the lower district rotted in silence. Cracked streets ran between collapsing houses. Smoke from hunger fires clung to the alleys like a sickness that never lifted. Children learned to survive before they could read. Mothers prayed, not for miracles, but for another day with bread. Here, coin was power, and those who had none didn't matter. The noble class ruled from their jeweled halls, untouched by the suffering below. They wore silk and silver while the poor buried their dead in unmarked graves. The royal tax collectors stripped the villages clean every month, leaving nothing but fear and resentment behind. Men and women disappeared without explanation, prisoners of royal law, never to return. They said King Aldrich brought order. They said he crushed rebellion. They said he was necessary. But to the people he was not a king. He was a shadow that watched from a throne of iron. In the taverns of the lower district, whispers spread like embers. Someone must stand against the crown. Someone must speak before we all starve. Someone must break the silence. And though no one dared admit it out loud, someone finally had. A servant girl with nothing, no title, no family, no power, had done what no lord, knight, or general ever dared. She had spoken. Lyria never belonged to the world of palaces and crowns. She slept in a narrow stone room beneath the castle kitchens, where the smell of smoke and boiled soup never faded. No window, no sunlight, just a straw bed, a worn blanket, and a single wooden box where she kept the few things she owned. To most, she was invisible, a servant girl who scrubbed floors and carried water buckets before dawn. Quiet, disciplined, forgettable. She moved like a shadow in a place where shadows survived longer than names. But there was something different about her, something the other servants whispered about in secret. She watched people, not with fear, but with unsettling awareness. She listened more than she spoke. And when she did speak, she chose her words like a soldier chooses weapons, carefully with purpose. She read, an unusual trait for someone from the lower district. Late at night, after the castle fell silent, she lit a small candle and studied old books scavenged from forgotten storage rooms. History, medicine, maps of royal territories. She knew things she shouldn't, and she never spoke of her past. Some said she was an orphan. Some said she had escaped a war. Others swore she once belonged to a traveling healer family. But no one knew for sure, and she offered no answers. Sometimes, while washing linens by the castle fountain, she would pause, eyes distant, as if haunted by a memory she refused to revisit. A loss she didn't name, a burden she carried alone. Yet under her calm silence lived an iron will. Not born from pride, not from ambition, but from pain and something stronger than fear. A promise. And the day she stepped forward to challenge the king, that promise finally began to reveal itself. While the people believed King Aldrich ruled alone with an iron fist, the truth was far more dangerous. Power in Arvindor did not rest solely on the throne. It lurked in the shadows behind it. In the Grand Council chamber, beneath banners of war and conquest, sat the king's closest advisors. Men feared not for their honor, but for their reach. At the head of the council sat Lord Cedric Halvar, Minister of Finance and Master of Deceit. Charming in public, venomous in private. His silver tongue controlled trade, taxes, and debt across the kingdom. Entire villages lived or died based on his signatures. He wore rings of gold on every finger, gifts taken from those who could no longer afford to breathe. Beside him stood General Maron Drager, commander of the royal army. While Cedric controlled wealth, Maron controlled fear. He was the blade to Cedric's poison, the enforcer of brutal laws, the man who burned villages suspected of rebellion. His armor was stained with smoke and war. His eyes held no mercy. Together, they shaped Aldrich's rule, whispering into the king's ear, twisting justice into control. They disguised greed as loyalty and corruption as order. And both of them now stood in the great hall, watching Lyria from a distance. A servant girl challenges the crown, Cedric murmured with a cold smile. How amusing. Maron didn't smile. This is a problem, he growled. She knows something. No one risks death unless they carry truth, or a plan. Cedric's eyes narrowed. Then we will find out what she knows, before the king does. Because the truth was simple. Lyria hadn't just challenged the king. She had just made herself the most dangerous enemy of the council. And they would not let her live for long. Lyria's wrists burned where the iron cuffs bit into her skin. Guards dragged her across the polished marble floor of the royal hall, echoing with the hushed fear of nobles and soldiers alike. Every step was a drumbeat of judgment. Every breath a reminder. This could be her last. At the center, on his elevated throne of black oak and steel, King Aldrich watched without a flicker of emotion. His gaze pierced through the crowd, scanning each face as though weighing their soul. The executioner stood ready, sword in hand, waiting for the inevitable. The chamber smelled of burning torches, dust, and fear. "Bring her forward," Aldrich commanded. His voice cut across the hall, colder than the stone walls themselves. The guards tightened their grip. Lyria's jaw clenched. She refused to show weakness. She had come too far, risked too much to falter now. When she knelt before the king, the murmurs swelled, speculation, judgment, fear. Every noble leaned forward. The court collectively held its breath. "You dare speak against my judgment in my own hall?" Aldrich asked, his tone razor-sharp. Lyria met his gaze steadily. "Because the judgment is false. This man," she gestured toward Sergeant Ryland, trembling nearby, "is innocent." The hall erupted in whispers, some shocked, some outraged. Aldrich lifted a hand. Silence fell like a steel trap. And then he did something no one expected. "Release her." The guards froze. Lyria blinked. The cuffs fell to the floor with a clang. Shock rippled through the chamber. "Explain yourself," Aldrich said, leaning forward. "Provide proof for your claim. Show me the truth." Even the nobles whispered among themselves. Never before had Aldrich spared a defiant subject. And never before had someone dared demand justice in his court without facing death. Lyria swallowed hard. She knew the danger. One misstep, one lie, and she would be executed. But her heart burned with resolve. She was no longer just a servant. Today she would face the king, and the kingdom itself, with the truth. And Aldrich, for the first time in years, would have to listen. The hall felt smaller somehow, as if the marble walls themselves were leaning in to witness what would come next. King Aldrich rose from his throne, his black cloak flowing behind him like a shadow swallowing the sun. His hands rested on the carved arms of the throne, knuckles white, eyes aflame with controlled rage. "Who dares raise their voice against me," he said, each word a blade, "must be prepared to die for it." His gaze locked on Lyria, piercing her like he could see every secret hidden behind her calm facade. The court went silent, every noble and soldier frozen, waiting for the inevitable strike. Lyria did not flinch. She straightened her back, chin high, and met his eyes with a courage that made even the hardened soldiers shift uneasily. "I do not fear the truth," she said, voice steady but ringing through the hall like a bell in a storm. Aldrich's lips twitched, half amusement, half disbelief. "The truth," he repeated, each syllable sharp. "You, a servant girl, claim to know what is right in my kingdom? Do you not fear the consequences of challenging a king?" "I fear injustice more than death," she replied. "I have watched lies pile up in this hall, watched men be condemned without cause, and I will not stand by while innocence suffers. Sergeant Ryland is being framed, and I know why." The hall trembled with murmurs, whispers spreading like wildfire. Nobles exchanged uneasy glances. Even the guards shifted their stances. No one had ever dared speak to the king like this, so openly, so recklessly. Aldrich leaned forward, resting one gauntlet hand on the throne. "Bold words," he said quietly, the calm edge of his voice more terrifying than any shout. "But words are wind, girl. Do you have proof, or do you wish to die for empty speech?" Her eyes met his, unwavering. "I have proof," she said, voice hardening. "If you truly want justice, you will listen to me." For a long moment, Aldrich studied her, silence stretching across the hall like a drawn sword. The king, feared by all, had been silenced again, not by force but by courage. And in that silence, a war of wills began. One between a tyrant accustomed to obedience and a servant determined to expose the truth. Aldrich's hand hovered over the court, still trembling from the echo of Lyria's words. Then, slowly, he straightened, his expression unreadable. "She will remain in the castle," he declared, his voice slicing through the murmurs. "Not as a prisoner. Not yet. But under watch. And if her claims are true, justice will follow." The hall froze. Guards exchanged confused glances. Nobles' mouths opened, then closed, eyes darting nervously to one another. A servant girl, not a noble, not a knight, had survived a direct challenge from the king. Lyria blinked, unsure if relief or disbelief should wash over her first. The iron cuffs fell to the floor with a hollow clang, echoing like a verdict in the stunned chamber. She rose, shoulders stiff, eyes sharp, already planning the next steps in her dangerous gamble. "Take her to the east wing," Aldrich commanded. "She will answer to me daily. Any attempt to lie, and she will regret the courage that brought her here." "Yes, your majesty," the captain of the guards replied, his voice tight with disbelief. As she was led away, whispers rippled through the castle halls, then spilled into the city beyond. By nightfall, the story spread like wildfire. The king spared the servant. She spoke the truth in the courtyard and lived. No one has ever defied Aldrich and survived. In taverns, marketplaces, and alleys, people leaned closer to one another, eyes wide, hearts pounding with hope and fear. Some whispered in awe, others in suspicion, but all recognized the moment's weight. Something had shifted. The king, feared and untouchable, had allowed truth to survive. And Lyria, small, unarmed, and daring beyond reason, had become more than a servant. She had become a symbol that the crown could be questioned, and the world might yet bend toward justice. As the sun dipped below the towers of Arvindor, shadows stretched long over the city. And somewhere, in the quiet of the East Wing, a servant girl prepared to step into a role she had never imagined, but one the kingdom would never forget. The castle was a labyrinth of corridors, echoing halls, and glittering chambers, an alien world for Lyria, whose life had been confined to the kitchens and servant quarters. Now, every step she took drew the wary eyes of those who had never seen her before, nobles and servants alike. In the East Wing, where she was confined under Aldrich's direct orders, the servants whispered behind her back, stealing glances full of fear and suspicion. Some avoided her altogether, crossing to the other side of a hallway rather than acknowledge the girl who had dared challenge the king. Others muttered rumors of curses and bad omens, convinced that anyone bold enough to survive such audacity must be dangerous. When she entered the dining hall for her first official audience, the nobles paused their conversation mid-laughter. Glasses clinked softly, then silence fell like a heavy curtain. The wealthy aristocrats regarded her as though she were an insect crawling across polished marble. "Who allowed her in here?" one whispered to another, voice dripping with contempt. "No one," the second replied, shaking his head. "The king, perhaps. But I will not bow to her. She has no place among us." Even the guards, trained to obey without question, kept their distance, hands hovering near their hilts. The hall's air was tense, charged with the knowledge that Lyria was neither a servant to be ordered around nor a noble to be humored. She existed in a space no one had prepared for, a living challenge to the hierarchy of power. Lyria, however, moved with quiet confidence. She didn't flinch from the sneers. She kept her head high, her eyes sharp, reading every gesture and murmur as if the castle itself were speaking to her. She learned the hidden ways through corridors, the subtle dynamics between nobles and servants, the dangerous games that unfolded behind gilded doors. At night, she reflected on the strange new world she had entered. Golden chandeliers above, marble floors below, and whispers echoing from every corner. Every glance she received reminded her of the precariousness of her position, but also of the power she now wielded simply by speaking truth to the king. In the quiet moments, she rehearsed her defenses, her arguments, her plan. The castle had become her battlefield, and she would not back down. She was no longer invisible. She was a spark in a palace that had long been shrouded in shadow. And the court had noticed. The candlelight in the council chamber flickered, casting tall, jagged shadows along the stone walls. King Aldrich sat behind the massive oak table, his hands folded but tense, eyes like steel cutting through the dimness. Across from him, Lyria stood, small but unyielding, the hem of her plain dress brushing the cold floor. "Do you truly think words alone can topple the authority of a king?" Aldrich asked, voice low but sharp, carrying the weight of decades spent commanding obedience. His gaze probed her, looking for the hesitation, the crack in her courage. "I do not intend to topple you," Lyria replied evenly, her voice calm measured. "I intend only to make you see the truth." Aldrich leaned forward, resting one elbow on the table. "The truth?" His lips curved into a shadow of a smile. "I have ruled this kingdom for 30 years. I know every lie before it is spoken. Do you truly believe you can surprise me?" Her eyes did not waver. "Perhaps not surprise, my king, but awaken. There are lies even you cannot see, hidden in plain sight, wrapped in gold and whispered in corners where you cannot hear." The room seemed to shrink. The flickering shadows now danced on their faces, highlighting the tension between them. Aldrich's jaw tightened. He had faced spies, rebels, traitors, but never someone who spoke truth so openly without fear. "You are reckless," he said, voice cold. "One false step and you will pay dearly. Do you understand what danger you court?" "I understand," she answered, her gaze meeting his fully. "I also understand that silence allows injustice to fester. If fear rules your court, then the people are lost. I will not be silent." Aldrich's eyes narrowed, a storm of disbelief and grudging respect brewing within them. He stood abruptly, the sound of his boots echoing through the chamber. "Bold words for a servant," he said, voice rising. "Do you know what you risk?" "Yes," she said simply. "And I will risk it, if it means the truth will not die here." For the first time in years, Aldrich felt uncertainty stir within him. Not fear, but curiosity. Not submission, but challenge. A spark had been lit, and neither would turn away from it. The psychological duel had begun, not with swords, but with words, with wills, and with the unflinching fire of two minds destined to collide. Late at night, the castle was silent, but for the soft flicker of candlelight in the east wing. Lyria crouched over a pile of parchment she had found hidden in a forgotten storage room behind the treasury. Dust coated the edges, but the ink was fresh enough to burn with intent. Her fingers traced the words carefully, decrees, tax records, and military orders, every signature forged. Names of loyal villagers accused of crimes they hadn't committed, property seized under false pretenses, bribes carefully laundered through the royal coffers. The handwriting bore a meticulous hand, and she recognized it instantly. Lord Cedric's elegant script, duplicated with precision to deceive even the king. Lyria's heart raced. These papers were proof. Proof of manipulation, of the council's betrayal, of a kingdom built on lies. She tucked them into her apron, eyes darting to the dark hallway. No one could know she had found this yet. Not Cedric, not Maron, not the spies who moved like shadows through the castle. The thought of Aldrich crossed her mind. He had ordered her to stay under watch, but he had also trusted her to speak truth. She could bring this to him, guide him toward justice, but first she had to survive. Footsteps approached. Lyria froze, holding her breath. A servant girl appeared, lantern in hand, eyes wide with curiosity. Lyria whispered sharply, "Not a word. If anyone suspects I have this, it will mean death." The other girl nodded silently, retreating into the shadows. Lyria returned to her task. She began cataloging every forged decree, piecing together a map of corruption. Cedric controlled trade, Maron controlled enforcement, and together they had slowly undermined the kingdom from within, using fear, money, and falsified law. The palace, so imposing by day, was a cage at night, its corridors lined with deceit. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the east wing windows, she had a clear plan forming in her mind. Gather evidence, identify the accomplices, and reveal the truth to Aldrich. But the deeper she delved, the more dangerous it became. Every scroll uncovered increased the risk, not just for her, but for the kingdom itself. In that quiet, candlelit room, Lyria understood a chilling fact. She had stepped into a war of shadows, and her courage would be tested long before the first sword was drawn. Yet she did not waver. She was ready to dismantle the corruption, one secret at a time. The king's private chambers smelled of cedar and burning tallow, a faint trace of the day's council meeting lingering in the air. Aldrich leaned against the edge of his desk, arms crossed, watching Lyria as she carefully arranged the documents she had smuggled from the East Wing archives. "You've been busy," he said, voice calm but carrying the weight of command. "I see more than I expected." "I have to know what's happening in my own home," she replied, eyes flicking up briefly to meet his. "If I do not, the council will continue to manipulate everything, including you." Aldrich's expression hardened. "Do you think I cannot see their schemes?" he asked. "I have ruled this kingdom for decades. I know deceit when I see it." Lyria's voice remained steady, but sharp. "You see what they allow you to see. They hide what they fear you will notice. And they fear me because I notice more." The room grew silent. Aldrich studied her, weighing her words. He had faced spies, traitors, assassins, but never a servant who could read the court like a map. There was a fire in her gaze, a combination of courage and insight that both unnerved and intrigued him. "You will stay here, then," he said finally, stepping closer. "Not as a servant, not as a prisoner. You will become my eyes where mine are blind." Lyria blinked. "Your eyes, my king?" "Secretly," Aldrich corrected, voice low. "The council cannot know. If they learn you are helping me see through their lies, they will destroy you." "I understand," she said, feeling the weight of the pact. It was dangerous, yes, but it was also the first time she had ever been truly trusted by the king himself. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You will tell me everything. Every whisper, every forged document, every misstep. I will act, but only if I know it is true." Lyria nodded. "I will be honest. Always." For the first time in the castle's long history of shadows, the king had an ally who spoke the truth without fear. And for Lyria, the alliance offered both power and danger. She had a place at the table, but one misstep could cost her life. As she left the chamber that evening, candlelight dancing across her determined face, she knew this was no ordinary trust. This was a pact that could topple a council or destroy them both. The palace had shifted, silently, irrevocably. The private library smelled of old parchment and wax, a quiet refuge from the tension of the castle. Shelves stretched high, crowded with leather-bound books, and the flicker of candlelight made the shadows sway across the walls. Aldrich sat behind a heavy oak desk, elbows resting on the polished surface, staring at a map of the kingdom spread before him. Lyria perched on a wooden chair across from him, hands folded in her lap, eyes alert but calm. "You rarely smile," she said softly, breaking the silence. Aldrich's lips twitched briefly, then vanished into a flat line. "Trust is expensive," he muttered, eyes scanning the map. "And I haven't afforded it in years." Her brow furrowed. "Not even with your closest advisors?" He chuckled, dry, bitter, almost a sigh. "Not them. Not anyone. Loyalty in Arvindor comes with a price, and I've paid too often. Friends become enemies, and enemies pretend to be friends. After a while, you learn not to believe anyone." The words hung heavy in the room. Lyria's heart softened. She had expected arrogance, cruelty, maybe indifference, but not honesty. Not vulnerability. "You don't have to bear it alone," she said quietly, leaning forward. "Even kings need someone to see clearly when the world clouds their judgment." Aldrich looked up, meeting her gaze. His eyes, sharp and commanding, softened just enough to show a hint of something long buried. Loneliness, fatigue, maybe even longing. And why would a servant care for a king's loneliness? "Because the crown doesn't define the man," she replied. "And the man deserves better than the crown sometimes allows." For a long moment he said nothing. Then he exhaled slowly, a weight lifting slightly from his shoulders. "You are unlike anyone I have met," he admitted. "You speak freely, without fear, without calculation. It is unsettling. And dangerous," she added lightly, a hint of a smile tugging at her lips. He allowed himself a brief laugh, small, almost human. "Yes, dangerous," he echoed. And for the first time, the iron mask of Aldrich Velaris, the king no one dared approach, cracked. They continued to talk late into the night, not as king and servant, but as two people navigating trust and truth in a world built on lies. Each word, each revelation, chipped away at the walls around him, while Lyria realized the depth of her own courage. Not just to speak, but to connect. By candlelight, they were no longer just adversary and subject. They were two minds, sharp, wary, but slowly, inevitably intertwining. The moon hung low over Arvindor, casting silver light across the castle courtyard. Lyria moved quietly through the east wing, clutching a bundle of papers she had discovered hidden in a false compartment behind the treasury ledgers. Her pulse thrummed like war drums. These documents were more dangerous than anything she had found before. As she spread the parchment across a narrow table in the candlelit chamber, the ink told a story darker than she had imagined. Correspondence between Lord Cedric, General Mayron, and figures she had only ever heard whispers of: mercenaries, assassins, and rebel leaders who thrived on chaos. The council wasn't just corrupt, they were orchestrating rebellion, manipulating both sides to consolidate their own power. She read aloud softly, almost to herself. Supply routes delayed, innocent villages targeted, destabilization, profit. Each word struck her chest like a blade. They were willing to burn the kingdom to secure their control, using violence and fear as weapons. Her mind raced. If Aldrich knew, he could act, but only if the evidence was undeniable. She gathered the papers, memorizing the connections, the coded symbols used to indicate planned attacks, and the bribes that lined the rebels' pockets. The council had not only betrayed the king, they had weaponized the people themselves. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Lyria froze. She pressed herself against the wall, holding her breath as a guard passed. Heart hammering, she waited until the sound of boots faded before moving again. Every moment was a gamble. One wrong move could mean death. Returning to Aldrich's private chambers, she placed the documents before him. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the intricate web of deceit. "So the council has been feeding rebellion to protect their power," he said slowly, voice tight. "They would destroy our people just to maintain control. And they nearly fooled me. They are counting on fear and secrecy," Lyria said, voice steady. "But now we know. You can act before they strike again." Aldrich's jaw clenched, and for a moment, the king's usual mask of cold authority faltered. "You've done well," he admitted, a rare note of respect threading through his tone. This changes everything. The council must be stopped, or the kingdom will burn. Lyria's eyes met his, understanding the weight of what lay ahead. The chessboard of Arvindor had shifted, and every move now carried life-or-death consequences. But with knowledge in hand, and the king's attention, she had a chance to turn the tide. For the first time, she realized the enormity of her role. Not just a servant who spoke truth, but a catalyst for the kingdom's survival. The wind howled against the high towers of Arvindor, rattling the leaded windows of the east wing. Lyria sat hunched over a small desk, candlelight flickering across a map marked with pins and notes. Among the papers she had gathered were fragments of correspondence, coded messages, and a diary she had discovered hidden in the treasury archives, belonging to none other than the late Queen Isolde. Her fingers trembled as she traced the delicate script, realizing the truth that had been obscured for years. The Queen's death, officially labeled a tragic accident, bore the fingerprints of politics, meticulously orchestrated by members of the council. Cedric's meticulous hand appeared in subtle directives. Meron's signature marked the deployment of soldiers to ensure the event would appear natural. Every detail aligned with Lyria's growing understanding of the council's greed and cruelty. She could hear the creak of the castle floor as Aldrich entered behind her, drawn by the soft rustle of parchment. He paused, leaning over her shoulder as she presented the evidence. "The Queen," he began, his voice low, thick with disbelief. "You mean she was assassinated?" Lyria nodded, swallowing hard. "It wasn't random, my king. She opposed them, stood against their schemes, demanded justice. They silenced her before she could expose the council's manipulations." Aldrich's fists clenched, nails biting into his palms. His usually controlled expression flickered, shadowed with grief, fury, and shock. "All these years, I thought it was an accident. And they played me like pawns on a board I couldn't even see. They've been orchestrating chaos from within, hiding behind your authority while destabilizing the kingdom," Lyria said. "If we act quickly, we can stop the next move. But we must be precise. One misstep, and the council will strike again." Aldrich ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room. The weight of betrayal pressed down like stone. "This changes everything. My queen, my wife, taken by those I trusted most. And you, how did you uncover this?" "I followed the threads," Lyria replied simply. "The forged documents, the coded letters, the irregular orders. They were sloppy enough for someone who observes closely." He stopped, looking at her with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "You've not only saved me from their schemes, you've given me the truth about her death." In that moment, the palace felt colder, heavier, yet strangely alive. The shadow of the Queen's murder now illuminated a path: revenge, justice, and the chance to reclaim a kingdom from those who had long betrayed it. Lyria realized the weight of her discovery. This was no longer about politics alone. It was personal, it was dangerous, and it would demand every ounce of courage she possessed. The council chamber was empty now, but the air remained heavy with secrets. Lyria stood before Aldrich, the candlelight casting sharp shadows on her face. She had avoided this confession for months, weighing the consequences of revealing the truth. Now silence demanded it. "My king," she began softly, voice steady despite the weight of her words. "There is something you must know, something I've hidden." Aldrich's eyes narrowed, the lines of tension around his mouth deepening. "Speak plainly, Lyria. I have little patience for riddles." She took a deep breath, hands trembling slightly. I witnessed the Queen's death. I was there the night she died." The words hung in the chamber like a blade suspended midair. Aldrich froze, the candlelight reflecting off his sharp eyes, now wide with shock. "You what?" he stammered, voice tight with disbelief. "You were there, and you did not tell me?" "I survived by hiding," she admitted, voice steady despite the tremor of memory. "I saw the council act. Cedric, Meron, they orchestrated it. They wanted her silenced before she could expose them. She paused, swallowing hard. "I thought I would be next if anyone knew I had seen. I've carried this secret alone all this time." Aldrich's hands tightened into fists at his sides. The room felt colder, the shadows deeper. Betrayal and grief collided in his chest. You hid from me?" His voice was low, searing, laced with both anguish and fury. "All this time I trusted you, believed in your counsel, and you—" "I protected you," Lyria interrupted, eyes unwavering. "I could not let them know I survived. I could not risk losing you, or the kingdom, to their schemes. Every word I've spoken since, it's been to guide you to the truth, even if it meant hiding myself." Aldrich's chest heaved. The weight of realization pressed down. The truth of the Queen's death, the council's betrayal, and now Lyria's secret. It was almost too much to bear. "I feel betrayed," he admitted quietly, voice breaking the steel of command he had relied upon for decades. "And yet, you may have saved everything by hiding this from me." For a long moment, they stood in silence. The shadows flickered, dancing over walls lined with tapestries depicting generations of kings and queens. In that quiet, a new understanding began to form, not just of loyalty and betrayal, but of survival, courage, and the tenuous line between trust and secrecy. Lyria met his gaze, unflinching. "I did what I had to do. And now, together, we can end their schemes and reclaim the kingdom." Aldrich's jaw clenched, a storm of anger and resolve brewing. The truth had been revealed, and the war within the walls of Arvindor was about to begin. The grand hall, usually echoing with deference, now pulsed with tension. Aldrich stood at the center, shoulders rigid, jaw clenched, eyes dark with a storm of conflicting emotions. Around him, the council watched with thinly veiled satisfaction, every gesture carefully restrained, every whisper a threat. Lyria stood before him, hands bound, chin high despite the heavy chains biting into her wrists. Her eyes met his, steady and unyielding, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her fear. "You have betrayed me," Aldrich said, voice low, controlled, but trembling with hurt and rage. "After all I entrusted to you, all the guidance, all the truth you claim to carry. You deceive me. You stand too close to my enemies, and now I cannot ignore it. I have done nothing but serve the kingdom." Lyria's voice rang clear, cutting through the murmurs in the chamber. "I have risked my life to expose their lies, to save you, to save Arvindor. You know the council's corruption. You know their plots, why turn against me?" Aldrich's eyes, sharp as blades, did not waver. "Your presence here has endangered everything," he replied, pointing to the council. "I cannot afford to be misled. Guards, take her to the dungeons. She will remain there until I am certain of her loyalty." Gasps echoed through the hall. Nobles shifted nervously, but the council, composed and smug, allowed themselves the slightest smirk. Cedric's eyes glimmered with triumph, Meron's jaw tightened in controlled satisfaction. Their whispers barely masked their glee. The first move in the council's new scheme had worked. Lyria did not resist, though her heart pounded. She had predicted betrayal, yes, but not so soon, and not from the king she had come to trust. Every step toward the dungeon was heavy, each clang of iron chains a reminder of how fragile her position had become. The council whispered among themselves, voices low but elated. "The king doubts her now," Cedric murmured, leaning close to Meron. "We control the narrative. Soon, the kingdom will bend entirely to us." Outside, the city slept unaware of the shift within the castle. Inside, shadows lengthened as treachery crept closer to the throne. Lyria, once a spark of defiance, was now a prisoner. While the council's conspiracy advanced, their power solidifying with every calculated move. And yet, even in chains, her eyes burned with quiet defiance. She knew the truth. She knew the danger. And she knew that the war for Arvindor's soul was far from over. The night was torn apart by the roar of chaos. Torches flared against the darkened walls of Arvindor as alarms blared, echoing through the castle corridors like a chorus of warning bells. Soldiers clashed with rebels in the courtyards, steel ringing against steel, screams tearing through the air. Lyria, still in chains but alert, pressed herself against the cold stone walls of the dungeon as the sounds of battle surged closer. The council's betrayal had gone further than she had feared. Armed factions, long funded and manipulated by Cedric and Meron, were storming the capital. The very streets outside were filled with fire and violence, loyal citizens caught between swords and terror. From the battlements above, Aldrich watched with grim determination. His black cloak whipped around him in the wind, eyes narrowed, scanning the battlefield. The king's army, loyal but outnumbered, clashed with the rebels, sparks of steel and blood illuminating the night. "This is worse than I imagined," Aldrich muttered to his captain, voice tight. "The council planned every step. They've turned the people against us, created chaos to cover their betrayal." And Lyria, his eyes flicked to the dungeon, his mind racing. She must be freed. She knows the truth. Inside the castle, Lyria's instincts surged. Chains rattled as she tested their strength. The sounds of combat above gave her a slim advantage. Guards distracted, walls breached. Every heartbeat reminded her of the stakes. If she failed, Aldrich would fall, the kingdom would crumble, and the council's grip would tighten forever. Outside, the streets were ablaze. Rebel forces had already seized the main gates, setting fire to the market and scattering loyalists. Citizens screamed and ran, caught in the tide of violence. Every torch seemed to mock the safety of the castle's inner walls. Lyria pressed herself further against the wall, eyes scanning for any weakness, any chance. The rebellion, orchestrated by those she had once trusted as the king's advisors, was her opportunity and her danger combined. Above, Aldrich roared orders to his commanders, steel and fire reflecting in his eyes. Within the castle, Lyria's chains clattered to the floor, loosened unseen. She inhaled sharply, moving silently through shadows, her resolve hardening. The council's perfect betrayal had begun, but the spark of resistance had also ignited. The war for Arvindor's heart had begun in earnest, and nothing would ever be the same. The castle trembled under the chaos of rebellion, fires casting a hellish glow across the courtyards. Aldrich stood atop the battlements, black cloak billowing in the wind, eyes scanning the turmoil below. Soldiers clashed with traitors, steel striking steel, cries of defiance and fear mixing with the roar of flames. His gaze shifted to the dungeon entrance, where Lyria's absence had finally registered. In that instant, clarity struck him. Every misstep, every hesitation, every doubt he had placed in her, all orchestrated by the council to weaken him, to isolate him from the one person who saw the truth. "They used me," he muttered, voice low, anger and shame coiling together. "Every move I made, every chain I placed, it was their design." With a swift motion, Aldrich drew his sword, the blade catching the torchlight in a blinding flash. "Release her," he roared to the guards, his voice carrying across the stone corridors like a thunderclap. "She stands with me. She is the truth this castle needs." Guards hesitated, fear of the king's wrath freezing them for a heartbeat too long. Then, shaken by the force of his command, they obeyed. Lyria stepped from the shadows, chains falling to the floor with a metallic clatter. Her eyes met his, a mixture of relief and resolve flashing across her face. "You finally see it," she said quietly, voice steady despite the chaos around them. "I see it now," Aldrich admitted, voice hoarse with emotion. "I let them manipulate me, let their lies blind me. Not anymore. From this moment we fight together, not as king and servant but as allies of justice." Outside, the rebels faltered as Aldrich's loyal soldiers regrouped, inspired by the sudden surge of leadership and clarity. The tide of battle shifted in the king's favor, the fire of betrayal met by the blaze of righteous defiance. Lyria fell into step beside him, sword in hand, eyes blazing with purpose. Together, they moved through the castle corridors, confronting the council's agents, dismantling the network of lies and deception one calculated strike at a time. For the first time, Aldrich felt the weight of choice, not the heavy burden of fear and obedience, but the sharp, invigorating edge of moral clarity. By trusting Lyria, by embracing truth over fear, he had reclaimed not just the castle, but the kingdom's honor. The council's plots crumbled under the combined force of the king and the servant who had dared to speak truth. In that moment, Arvindor's future hung not on chains or lies, but on courage, trust, and an unbreakable alliance. The throne room erupted into chaos, torches casting flickering shadows over the polished marble floors. Aldrich stood near the dais, sword drawn, eyes scanning the advancing council guards who had turned on the crown. Every step echoed with the weight of betrayal and desperation. "Hold the line," he roared, voice cutting through the clamor. His soldiers met the council's forces with clashing steel, shields splintering under brutal strikes. The air was thick with smoke, the scent of blood and burning tapestries mingling in a suffocating haze. From the shadows, Lyria moved like a shadow herself, eyes sharp, sword ready. She had anticipated the council's moves, predicting every flank, every attempt to overwhelm the king. Her strikes were precise, cutting through the chaos with lethal grace. Aldrich parried a vicious blow from Meron, the force pushing him back toward the dais. Sparks flew as steel met steel. Meron's eyes burned with rage, but before he could deliver a final strike, Lyria lunged from behind a shattered pillar, blade slicing through his guard and saving the king in a heartbeat. "You rely too much on your advisors," she shouted, voice ringing across the hall. "Don't forget who stands beside you." Aldrich's chest heaved as he nodded, drawing strength from her courage. Together, they moved as one, a storm of determination against the treacherous council. Cedric attempted to flank Aldrich, dagger aimed at his back, but Lyria intercepted, knocking him off balance and turning the tide. The battle intensified, the throne room a whirl of motion and noise. Shouts, clanging steel, and the roar of defiance filled every corner. Guards loyal to the king joined forces with the unlikely ally of a servant girl, pushing back the corrupt council members who had believed the throne was theirs to manipulate. Aldrich's eyes met Lyria's across the chaos. In that instant, no words were needed. Every glance, every strike, every calculated movement spoke of trust, unity, and shared purpose. The council's power crumbled beneath their combined force, and for the first time in decades, the king fought not alone, but with someone who truly understood the stakes. With a final sweep, Lyria disarmed Cedric, sending him sprawling to the marble floor. Aldrich struck decisively, ending the battle with a roar that shook the throne room. Silence followed, broken only by the crackle of torches and the groans of the defeated. The throne room was theirs again. Smoke and dust hung in the air, but the king stood alive, unbroken, and beside him, Lyria, a symbol of courage and truth. Together, they had survived the betrayal and reclaimed the heart of the castle. The morning sun rose over Arvindor, burning away the smoke and shadows of the night's chaos. The castle gates, once barred by fear and treachery, were flung open as the citizens poured into the courtyards, their cheers echoing off the stone walls. The people, long oppressed and silenced, had finally claimed their home. Aldrich stood on the balcony of the throne room, shoulders squared, eyes scanning the crowd. The weight of the crown felt different now, not as a symbol of tyranny, but as a responsibility to those he ruled. Behind him, Lyria watched silently, her hand resting lightly on the hilt of her sword, ever vigilant yet calm. "The council is defeated," Aldrich declared, voice carrying over the cheering masses. "Those who betrayed the kingdom will answer for their crimes. No longer will fear rule Arvindor. No longer will deceit decide our fate." He lowered his gaze, his tone softening. "I renounce the tyranny that I allowed to take root in these walls. From this day forward, this throne will serve the people, not the ambitions of the few. Together we will rebuild. Together we will reclaim honor, justice, and peace." The citizens erupted in renewed applause. Voices joined in a chorus of hope. Soldiers who had fought through the night relaxed, smiling at the sight of unity, while nobles who had remained loyal to the kingdom stepped forward, pledging their service to a new era. Lyria approached Aldrich, her expression steady but proud. "The people have reclaimed what was theirs," she said. "The council can no longer harm them." Aldrich nodded, a quiet gratitude in his eyes. "And neither will they harm us. Together we have restored Arvindor, not by fear but by truth and courage." Above, the banners of the kingdom flapped gently in the morning breeze. Sunlight glinted off the walls, revealing the scars of battle, yet also illuminating the promise of renewal. The citizens, the soldiers, and their king now stood united, a living testament that justice could triumph even after betrayal ran deep. In the heart of Arvindor, hope was reborn, and the kingdom began to heal. The grand balcony of the castle overlooked a sea of faces, citizens, soldiers, and nobles alike, all gathered in celebration, their cheers still echoing from the recent victory. Sunlight bathed the courtyard in golden warmth, illuminating banners that flapped gently in the morning breeze. Aldrich stood at the balcony's edge, his armor polished but dulled by the soot and blood of battle, eyes searching for the one who had changed everything. Lyria emerged from the throng, her cloak brushing the stone floor, eyes meeting his with unwavering resolve and a hint of shy anticipation. "Lyria," Aldrich began, voice steady yet brimming with emotion, carrying over the murmurs of the gathered crowd. "Through fire and betrayal, through fear and deception, you have stood beside me. You have risked everything to save not just me, but the kingdom itself." She stepped closer, heart pounding, knowing the weight of the moment, feeling the warmth of sunlight against her face, the eyes of the kingdom upon them. "You have shown me what it means to trust, to fight for truth, and to love without hesitation," he continued, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "I cannot imagine ruling without you. I do not wish to." A soft gasp rippled through the crowd as Aldrich took her hands in his. "Lyria, I ask you, not only to help me govern this kingdom, but to stand with me as my equal, my partner, my queen. Will you?" For a heartbeat, time seemed to still. Lyria's eyes glistened with tears of relief, pride, and love. Then she smiled, the world narrowing to the man who had trusted her, fought beside her, and shared his heart openly. "Yes," she whispered, voice clear and unwavering. Aldrich pulled her close, lips meeting hers in a kiss that spoke of triumph, trust, and the promise of a shared future. The crowd erupted in joyous applause, but in that moment, none of it mattered except the two of them, standing together on the balcony, victorious not only in battle but in love. The kingdom of Arvindor, once fractured by deceit and fear, now watched its king and new queen united, symbols of courage, truth, and the power of hearts unyielding. Sunlight shone brighter that day, illuminating not just a castle reclaimed, but a love that would shape the future of the realm.